Well, hey, welcome back. I am here with a very special guest, George Alexopoulos. He is a comic book artist, cartoonist. He has the most upvoted comic in Reddit history. Is that right?
For its time, I think it's been dethroned.
Okay. Wow. Well, George unapologetically fights the left and creates really good content, good stories. So thanks for coming on the show, George.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. I just realized I was recording. Who cares? Already a bad start. I was recording the wrong screens. You'll see. It'll be
Okay.
embarrassing. Hi. Thank you. This shows everyone how professional and how much I plan things ahead of time.
Well, and me too. That's embarrassing. But that's okay. Well, so first I wanted to ask you about your artistic journey. I love your art and I can show some shots of the comic up on the screen. I want to know kind of what brought you here as an artist, and were you always interested in art? Did that kind of develop? So tell me about that.
I mean, I used to read the Sunday funnies, in the newspaper, like Peanuts, Calvin and Hobbes, and all those. So I was, I don't know, elementary school and all that stuff. And I would watch the cartoons, Disney movies, all that stuff. And I think a lot of kids draw when they're younger. And I just never stopped, I suppose. When it came time to select a profession, I thought about, I was in late high school. What's the thing that I like to do the most? What am I the best at? Which is a fairly short list. And I said, well, I guess I draw a lot, so maybe I'll pursue this. And I did. And profession wise, I would say I still have not been able to really make it a full time endeavor. It's still every few months, it's like I have to find a new vein to mine
Hmm.
as far as earning a living. But that's kind of interesting in its own way. The cartooning the past 4 years, I would say, has been more stable as far as my growth goes. People and more people seem to want to see my modern event or current events strips. So as long as they're interested, I guess I'll keep making them. Although I would still say that's a fraction of my overall interests. I want to tell stories, and soon I'll be starting a little side business with my family to make like children's books and stuff like that. But I'm taking a back seat actually. I'll be sort of the help, so we could talk about that. But yeah, I've it's always been a hobby, and profession wise, I don't really want to do anything else. I'm not good at much else, so I've sort of fallen into it. If that answers the question.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. I know you've been talking about your passion for a long time on social media about wanting to make children's books or just make good stories. And a lot of the people that I respect the most in the world, in the art community and outside of it, are really passionate about storytelling. So that's really interesting that you would say that, because I also wanted to talk about story, because I know that you make good stories, you have good values that you want to put in your stories. You don't follow the typical if you want to make a popular story nowadays, you have to push some kind of agenda. So what kind of is your perspective on how a lot of stories look nowadays versus the kind of stories that you want to create?
There are different ways to approach the experience of receiving a story and uh, composing a story. And from a audience member perspective, the things I value might be something like characters I like to spend time with, or just a fun adventure that I want to revisit. Lord of the Rings or something. It's just fun to visit this world and hang out in this world and meet all these cool people and pretend that I'm one of them. A fly on the wall kind of story. Those are experience stories, and then there are other stories that are fables, or they have like little morals at the end. They're a little less covert about their intent, and they don't have to be subversive or anything. Like Aesop's fables or something like that. And there's a clear point to the story. Like I don't read the old Brothers Grimm you know, was that like Cinderella and stuff and Hansel and Gretel? Those aren't kinds of stories where I say, wow, Hansel and Gretel were really well written characters, and I really just want to spend more time analyzing them from a Jungian perspective. No,
Yeah.
the point of that story is to teach you a moral, I guess, and to scare kids and to essentially tell kids don't go wandering in the woods or something like that. There are other morals. As a person writing stories, you could approach it from the direction of I have a thesis that I want to communicate, and then I will select themes and tones that will outline that thesis. Like, say, I want to write a story that the ultimate thesis is, I don't know, getting divorced is bad. So now I'm going to write a story about what are the tones. Like, maybe some tones are I'm going to highlight the happy parts of marriage and sticking with your spouse through the hard times. And there are different tones, emotional tones, that I might select to support that thesis. And then another layer down, you create things like character, plot, setting, scenes. So it's like a pyramid, not a pyramid scheme, but you would start with the thesis perhaps, or maybe sometimes you start from the bottom up. You select, hey, there's some really cool characters. Like, I want to do an action story about fighting bad guys on a motorcycle. So now I'm going to write a story around that. But all storytelling, I guess, has common elements like character setting, morals, a thesis. And you and I come from a background where we've had, I'm sure, extensive training or Sunday school practice, and we've heard the biblical stories a million times, and I guess they just seep into our bones so deeply that we understand at the very bottom of the human experience is storytelling, and that may be the most powerful tool in our tool belt is language and communication. And so maybe we just naturally gravitated towards what we thought was the strongest way to fix the world, change the world. I don't know. There's something very powerful in storytelling that can rewire the human brain that you can't get through other professions. So maybe we just sensed it as we grew up. Like, we were a powerful speaker or pastor or something might tell us biblical stories or any stories, and we were just so in awe of it week after week, and then we wanted to pursue it as a profession, or just, what is this power? I want to wield it as well. This feeling of making someone close a book or finish a sermon and just be like, my world has changed. That's, yeah, I guess that's what storytelling is. And we could talk more about that if you want. But
Yeah, I think you're totally right on when you explain like the kind of feelings you get from certain kind of stories. And I've definitely felt that myself, and I want to be, a good storyteller myself, and I want to learn more about this, and I want to talk to people like you and learn from other people who I think are really good storytellers in art and outside of art, and old authors and things like that. And uh, yeah, I think this there's some special element that makes up that kind of story as opposed to a lot of the stories that we see around us today, like a lot of the movies. I bet you would agree, but you could tell me if you don't. Like a lot of the movies today and the entertainment and almost the entirety of the comic book industry, except for this emerging kind of group of anti woke indie comics, is totally corrupted by wokeness and has these terrible stories nowadays that are just pushing an agenda. What differentiates those bad stories from the good stories, even if you can make a good story based around some kind of value, like I want to teach some kind of lesson, the left wants to teach a certain kind of lesson, and then we might want to teach another kind of lesson. So maybe what differentiates the stories, and then also what makes the lessons that the stories that comes from the lessons that they want to teach bad, and then the stories that hopefully we want to try to tell good.
uh, I guess we can say the problem with their style of storytelling is very heavy handed in
Mm.
that their thesis or the moral of their story is very, it's like clubbing you over the head with it. This is what this story is about, and let's all right, now is the time when we clap, and so saves the day. Isn't that so great? And it's what you could call outside in storytelling in biblical parlance. Maybe it's exegesis versus
I,
eisegesis.
I see Jesus. Yeah, putting your meaning into a story instead of letting the story kind of tell itself and come
Yeah,
out.
it's a
Yeah,
form of postmodernism where I'm going to write a story and I'm going to tell you what it's about and what you should feel when you're done reading it, as
yeah,
opposed to I'm going to write a story that maybe I don't even know what it's about at the beginning, but I'm just going to explore it and let the characters almost speak through me, like a medium, a spirit medium or something. And maybe something cool will come out of it, maybe nothing cool will come out of it, and I'm not going to tell you what you should feel because I'm not writing propaganda. It's like a Sesame Street story where it's simple enough to tell kids, all right, I'm going to teach you the ABCs, and this is what the ABCs are, and you're going to know them by the end, as opposed to this is what my morality is, and it applies broad brush across all of humanity, and you're not even allowed to disagree with me or ask questions. I'm going to tell you what right and wrong is, and this is the bad guy, and this is what he wants, and he's just a bad guy. We don't even need to explain him or learn about his motivations, and this is the good guy or good girl, and they're going to punch the bad guy and teach him a lesson. Or maybe it's more heavy handed than that, more nuanced, but still you can feel as a viewer that you're being preached to, and not in a pleasant way. I can tell when a story is trying to manipulate me very quickly, and I don't like being manipulated. There are even people are praising the Terminal List, and if you've
right.
seen any of it,
I haven't, but yeah, I've seen clips and
all
I
right,
know a little bit about it.
all right, it's fine. I'm not going to criticize it, but there are points of it where it's kind of heavy-handed and it's sort of sad music playing, and main character looks very sad, and it's like the Punisher, he lost his family kind of thing.
Yeah,
um, where even though that story is on our side, which I don't even know what that means, I still feel a little bit of this is soap opera stuff, this is lame, as opposed to a story where true cinema invites you to be part of the storytelling process, where even Alfred Hitchcock has talked about, if I show you my face, a neutral face, and then you cut to like a beautiful woman walking on the street, and then the next shot is me smiling, you will assume, you, the audience, will fill in the blanks of I'm looking at the woman, and then I smirk. But if you cut the woman and replace her with like a pile of garbage with flies on it, and then I smile afterwards, you will assume something very different about me. So true cinema, the art of cinema, invites the audience to fill in the blanks as opposed to being spoon fed a moral. But I don't think most audiences want to be uh, active participants. They like being spoon fed. So it's to our advantage, I guess, that the left, being the dominant force in most entertainment now, games, movies, music, comic books, whatever, yeah, they hire their friends, which is to our benefit, because when you have nepotism like that, you don't tend to hire for talent. You tend to hire based on, can I control you? And that's how you get Kathleen Kennedy ruining Star Wars, for instance, where she's obviously not qualified to be telling stories, as we've seen over many instances of many movies and TV shows. She just poops all over all of them. And she's the common denominator in all those projects, the failed projects. And the ones where the ones that do well are the ones where she has the least influence. So her, as an example, just off the top of my head, she's hiring people not based on talent, which is how you get Mandalorian and stuff, but based on whatever criteria she decides, we need more of this type of person. Again, superficial characteristics. I want this type of person to be the director of a story. Never mind if they're not qualified or not. And so we end up with mediocre, preachy nonsense. And the flip side to that coin is you get talented people who are now living in the fringes, in the wilderness, you might say, trying to subsist on audience goodwill. And I'm not including myself, but I know talented creators who are struggling, who can't find work in the traditional publishing. But we have the goodwill of the audience, which is far more powerful in the long run, I hope, as long as we don't sell out to companies that would rather have us unemployed. Even though we're starving now, we have the goodwill of the audience, which may pay off in the long run. But I don't know what's going to happen. Like, for instance, there's the famous Eric July instance of, had you follow that at all? With he got like $3 million of funding in a week or something.
Oh, it was,
He's
is that
Young
the?
Ripa on Twitter.
Yes, yeah. I have been following that. Yeah,
So he, his project exploded in a week, $3 million, something like that.
yeah,
And it's like, wow, finally fans are growing, are voting with the wallets, and they've been doing it more and more over the years. But I think it sends a powerful message that a relative indie creator who hasn't published a lot of stuff can get that much money as a startup, just on the promise of, I'm not going to screw you to the audience. I'm going to treat you with respect, and I'm going to try to publish a story that you're going to enjoy. And that's all we want as audiences. And let's take it from there. I don't think we need the middlemen anymore, the Kathleen Kennedy types, who want to tell us what stories we should consume, as opposed to the audience, maybe I just want a story about a guy who goes crazy and kills all the bad guys. And then at the end, there's a meme I like of, I don't remember, it's like a Chad meme where he goes like, so the guy gets the girl at the end and saves the day. Splendid. And it makes me laugh because it's so simple and dumb. That's all I want right now.
yeah.
I'm talking too much. Go on.
No, yeah, especially with this oversaturation of leftist values. It seems like there's a need almost right now for conservative quality art. And I'm wondering if you think that that has anything to do with the fact that the conservatives are on the correct side, or if it's just like the market bouncing back because there's an oversaturation of the opposite kind of thing.
I suppose markets behave based on a supply and demand problem. So if there's a lot of demand for non-woke stories that will appeal to a certain demographic, like right now, the people throwing money at, say, the Rippaverse are men in their 30s, 40s, perhaps 20s, some in their 50s, who remember a better time in entertainment. We are nostalgic about 80s and 90s cinema, and we want action, and we want stories that tell us about male ideals, perhaps, so that we can look at a character as a lot of storytelling does this. I look at a character who's noble, and I say, I want to be like him, because growing up, lots of people, I'm just a lump of clay trying to decide what I want to become. And I need characters to emulate. So I'll take a little bit of, I like Aragorn, so I'm going to be like Aragorn. And I like John Rambo, so I'm going to be a little bit like John Rambo. So there are just little things about characters and stories that we gravitate towards, and I don't think we realize why when we're younger, especially. But like, if there's a movie that I've seen more than 100 times, I have to ask myself, why have I seen it so many times? What lessons am I? Not only did I eat the meat on the bone, I'm now sucking the marrow out, and I'm chewing on the bone because there's something there that my subconscious wants to I want to become this for some reason. So if the market says I want stories that are non-woke, that are telling values or uplifting morals that I think are good and noble, as opposed to telling me about morals that I disagree with or I don't identify with. Like, I have a story about a 20 something redhead girl who gets in a robot suit and fights monsters or something. And I don't imagine a lot of men in their 50s are going to be interested, because they're not going to read this story and say, I want to be like her. So that's, I don't expect that to be as popular as, say, a story about a macho dude, again, terminal list. His
Yeah.
family gets killed and he goes on a mad rampage, killing all the bad guys. And that's why it's the number one series on Amazon. I think audiences are not as complicated as we think. They just want stories that at the end, when they turn it off, they say, oh man, that was cool. I want to be like him, in so many ways. Like, a lot of conservative men right now, subconsciously or consciously, have a dark, almost fantasy of F around and find out sort of thing, where I am being very patient, but I'm being pushed to the point where if I'm pushed too hard, I don't know what I'll do. And a series like that gives you an outlet for that fantasy of, if this happened to me and if this happened to my friends and family, I could see myself going into the wilderness and going Rambo on everybody. And that's what a lot of storytelling can be: wish fulfillment fantasy. It's a safe way to explore hypothetical fantasies, and then you turn it off at the end, and hopefully, you got to have that outlet, and we don't have to see what happens when a man's pushed beyond his limits.
That's interesting because I think it seems to me that that thing is especially popular right now, and it just popped into my head when you brought it up because we have so much uh, oppression, like actual oppression of actual masculinity in our
Mm.
culture. And so when masculinity is oppressed, like many things, then it can boil over. And so, we would recognize that it's not a good thing to go on a murderous rampage necessarily,
No.
but that might be a wish fulfillment for some people. But if we had like a proper balance of values in our culture, then we could enjoy uh, things um, like a character, yeah, something like in Lord of the Rings, where people, they get appropriately angry at things and they appropriately want to seek vengeance, but then there's love, and then there's fighting good battles, and there's not this there's not this kind of excess of a certain kind of thing, like let's just make this all about revenge or something, even though that could absolutely make a good story. And you could even put revenge in kind of a noble light, like give revenge for the right thing without kind of a boiling over, or a kind of a blowing up of excess masculinity or something.
Well, there is something to be said for the male, traditionally male fantasy of being powerful, like a
Mm-hmm.
caveman. I'm going to fight the thing that's threatening the town and save the day. You got the cowboy fantasy story. There's a bunch of bandits, like Tombstone or whatever. There are a bunch of bandits and they're causing trouble for all the women and children. And it takes a man, a good monster, you might say, a man with a little bit of darkness in him who can control it. And he's
Mm-hmm.
going to go, and maybe he is haunted by some dark things he's done in the past, but darn it, he's going to do the right thing. And he's going to let his dark side off the leash a little bit to beat the bad guys. And then, even though he's carrying the burden of that darkness, he's going to put it away like a weapon, you might say. It's scary to have someone holding a weapon in the room, but at the same time, you want someone who knows how to use that weapon. And one might argue that is biblical, in the sense of, I'm not going to just let, this is arguable, I guess, but I'm not going to just let bad guys destroy everything around me. You might say it is a commandment. I don't know. I won't speak for God. But it is good to be ready to lay down your life for your loved ones. And that might be one of the morals. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn. But There
Well, I think that
is.
it's an unpopular Christian value, especially nowadays, because I think in the same way that the entertainment industry is overrun with leftism, I think the church has become more feminine, and the church has become actually less Christian, even though they still. I mean, there are definitely good churches out there, but I think bad churches are more prevalent than ever. Churches that have been corrupted by the world and by wokeness and by the left and whatever. And I think an unpopular value that I think Christians and then just objectively people ought to have is that we should have a willingness to offend, and we should have a willingness to fight. And Jesus wasn't at all a pacifist, even though that's what some people say. There is definitely a nobility in following your duty, your uh, your moral duties, even if it means to some extent. I mean, like a Christian could go to war and they could fight an enemy and they could fight for a good cause. C.S. Lewis tells an interesting story where, let's say he's in a war, and then there's a Christian on the opposing side of the war, and they shoot each other at the same time and they meet each other in heaven. They will laugh together and think it was, yeah, like they would have a good relationship. They would have no animosity towards each other whatsoever, and it was a noble thing that they did to fight for their duties.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a million points of ambiguity that people can argue, like, was Jesus a pacifist, for instance? And it's not exactly the interpretation that I was raised to believe, let's say, where it's not, we're not fighting, period. It's, we're not fighting now because the fight belongs to God and he will
Right.
tell us when it's time. As in, like, Jesus is coming back with a sword, whereas before it was with a promise of salvation.
Yeah.
And Christians, I guess, disagree on, is it our job to run sword swinging into other countries to solve problems that have nothing to do with us? And that's where some ambiguity might, I can argue either way. But the point being is that, let's say now the fight is being brought to us on our soil, and now the discussion becomes, well, a Christian man or just a conservative man might say, many American men have weapons and they don't want to use them, but they go through scenarios in their head of what would happen if this happens to me every night. If someone broke in, okay, my first move is this, and if that fails, my second move is this, and hopefully I'm not dead by then. And if move one is successful, then I will move on to this other move. And we think about these things because who else in our family is going to fix or save us? I'm not going to. It's like that silly parable, and I could talk about this forever and it's boring. But like the guy who's, there's a big flood coming and he goes up to his roof and he says, "Oh, God will save me." Somebody comes by with a rowboat. You know this one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so yada yada. It's like, well, God did send you the rowboats, and you said no because you assumed God was going to save you. So, guy breaks into your house. There are crazy people down the street with machetes. You say a quick prayer, and then you get your weapon out, and whatever happens, happens. Would be my interpretation of these stories of, is God going to save you? I don't think a meteor is going to come down and slay the bad guys. Sometimes the way that God will save us is by empowering good people to do things that are maybe morally not the greatest, but uh, righteous. And
Yeah.
but unfortunately, that's a point of no return, and let's hope that we never get there. Like, I hear a lot of people talking about Civil War II and all that stuff, and I really hope we never get there, because that's a point of no return, and we
Yeah.
should do everything we can to not get there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's healthy to not fantasize, but go through scenarios, and fiction and storytelling are parts of these things. They're what ifs. And
Mm.
sometimes at the end of an action movie, I might feel a certain righteous satisfaction, like the Terminal List. He kills the bad guy, let's say. But at the end of a certain episode, I feel sick afterwards. Like, he killed a bad guy in a really gruesome way, let's say.
Yeah.
But then I'm just like, oh, this is such an ugly feeling. And so I get to go through a miniature version of his experience without actually having to go through it, because any man who had to go through what he went through would just delete himself or
Yeah.
drink himself into a coma. And thank God most of us don't have to go through stuff like that. But we have the benefit of analyzing what if and then learning lessons from it. And then we go about our regular life. That's what a lot of stories are. They're good parables and what ifs. I'm talking
Yeah.
too much.
No, you're not. Since we're already on the subject, I wanted to ask you about kind of your spiritual journey and what brought you to this point, and then we can get into politics and stuff later. But what you mentioned to me that you're an agnostic. Is that still true? And kind of what brought you to the point where you're at currently on religion?
Well, I was brought up Protestant, uh, Sunday school, all that good stuff, youth group, had a great time, had my best friends in the whole world were through the youth group. And then college came around, late high school, and most of my friends moved. And I was already in that teenage, shaky, what does it all mean kind of thing. I didn't want to just believe because I was told to. I wanted to come to it on my own. And so I broke away for a few years and just kind of lived however.
Hmm.
Nothing really special happened. But I just stopped going to church. And then my early 20s, I came back having read a lot of C.S. Lewis books and all that stuff. And
Wow.
I came back with a fiery passion. And I said, you know what? I need these apologetics books. And I read so many of them. And I got involved again with youth group stuff as like a sort of older brother, kind of helping them out. And I wanted to be a speaker myself because I was so motivated and I was reading so many books and I did Bible studies and all that good stuff. And by my late 20s, I guess, I reached a point where I was asking myself, am I forcing my faith onto myself? What if I just let my foot off the gas pedal and I just sort of let the car coast, I suppose? And over the years, I'm 37 now, let's say I live as if I never took my foot off the gas, but I'm sort of in a position where I maybe it's more accurate to say the door is open. I never
Hmm.
closed it. And I don't want to say I don't believe because I do. I want to. But perhaps pending further revelation. And that's a very scary thing to say because I've read the Bible and I know what that means to be visited by God. That's not a good thing. Usually
Hey,
when someone's visited, that means your life's about to be ruined. Uh, so but anyway, I've hit the pause button. And so I say I'm agnostic, but I know the scriptures and I respect it. And I deeply respect people who live it out. And that's why I like your podcast and that's why I was interested in your Instagram at first when I first came across it. I'm like,
yeah.
there's a big difference between, and I know hypocrisy is a huge thing that you talk about a lot. There's a difference between people who talk about the gospel and all that stuff and people who live it out. And I've seen so many people living it out in unworthy ways. They still go to church, but it's the difference of, is the tree bearing good fruit, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I can tell, and I think a trained Christian can tell when someone is bearing good fruit and when someone has all the external. You can tell that they're a phony baloney, let's say, even though
Yeah.
they have all the externals of good Christian and all that stuff. But you're saying things that I'm not sure. I don't know. There's just a certain fraudulent thing that goes on, but I keep my mouth shut a lot of the time. So anyway, that's sort of where I am now. I want to be, I want to commune
Hmm.
with whatever,
Hmm.
but I just have my fishing line in the water and I am waiting, I guess, and I don't know what that means even, but I also don't want to live in a way like the content of my work, you could say, if you look at what's going on subconsciously with me. I
Hmm.
don't want to. deny myself of truths that I would avoid if I were practicing like I was when I was younger, like violence and rated R stuff. I don't shy away from that stuff anymore, whereas I used to. And I think it's dangerous to pretend like those things don't exist in the human psyche.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, on that, I think that's one very interesting misconception I think that people have about Christianity. And, I don't really know where this comes from. It doesn't come from the Bible because the Bible is one of the most violent books that exist.
yeah,
So I don't think a Christian can say violence in and of itself is bad. But like you said earlier, I think that we can recognize that, well, in a way, violence itself is bad because there shouldn't be violence in the world. The world would be far better if everything was at peace. However, in the world that we live in, violence can absolutely be a good thing. There's a time to pick up your sword if it's to defend good things. And so yeah, I think like a Christian should expose themselves to uh, and I'll qualify what I'm going to say. I think a Christian or just a human being should expose themselves to the things of the world, but not be corrupted by it. And I think that's what the Bible means when it says that we should be in the world, but not be of the world.
yeah. Perhaps then the reason that a lot of Christians don't pursue the darker things is
Yeah.
because they're afraid of being corrupted by it. Like, say, a lot of guys might avoid sexy stuff because they're afraid that it'll tempt them or something. And maybe that's fair. But
And I
then,
think that's, oh, go ahead.
oh no, I just think there is a point, there's a blind spot in society where there are bad things, like, say, the drag queen story hour. That was a major blind spot for a lot of us because we don't hang out in those circles.
Mhm.
And, but I'm not, I don't want to say I'm going to dive into every place that I've felt grossed out by, but I am aware that they've been doing that. And I've been watching, and just, you surf the web, you get to know people, and you see what kind of things are going on. It didn't surprise me, but what surprised me was people are now acting like this came out of nowhere. And if you talk to gay people and learn about their life story and stuff, it is it is surprising and not surprising to learn how big of a percentage of them were exposed at a young age. And Christians are acting surprised. And I say, but you guys, you have a blind spot culturally, and you have many blind spots because you don't let yourself talk to these people, or you don't let yourself, like, maybe preachers need to be going into these places and talking to these people, like being among sinners, of which we are also sinners. But there's types of Christians who don't want to be around them at all because they might be corrupted, or there are the types of Christians who might not be around sinners because they find them gross or they think they're better than them. And let's not even bother talking about them. My understanding of the gospel is that you're supposed to be among people who have not heard it before and highlight, hey, you don't have to live like this and all that. I'm talking about too many different subjects at once.
Yeah,
But
that's okay. I think there's an element for sure of Christians not wanting to be corrupted by certain things to an extent, I think. But I think the bigger issue is something that you just touched on, which was that I think some Christians, maybe they say they don't want to be, or they don't want to be around certain things because they don't want to be corrupted by it, when in fact they have this idea of like a Pharisaical attitude where the Pharisees didn't want to have anything to do with, the tax collectors and the evil people of the time. When you're right, Christians should be ministering to these people if what they believe is actually true. But at the same time, we shouldn't be corrupted by those things ourselves. And I think there's, you would have to look at each thing case by case, like a Christian to understand drag queen story hour shouldn't themselves dress in drag and do a story hour. we can
Correct.
under we can understand these things, and we can, I don't know, expose ourselves to the idea of these things without internalizing the theology of them. Even, let's say, like critical race theory, for example. I've spoken with Christians. It's like, why, I just want to be open to this. I want to learn about it, and I want to study it a little before I make a real decision. And I think that that's not a wise thing to do, because sometimes to open the door to things that are obviously and blatantly evil, and it's not obviously evil for a lot of people, because I think some people have more of an eye for these things than others. Like you said, it takes a trained Christian, or it takes a trained person in general, just to see a fraud in something. And so I think when we start opening certain doors to things like, yeah, I'll just let a little bit of critical race theory in, or I'll just let a little bit of racism in, or that, this one part's okay. And even though I know its roots are completely based in Marxism and atheism, I don't want to throw it out. Then I think that's bad and that's dangerous. But we should at least know about certain things so that we can fight against them if they're bad, like the drag queen story hour stuff. And then it's the Christians who don't, who, are too maybe high and mighty to even worry about such things, that I think are actually the ones who are corrupted by the world, because they are the ones who say, like, I'm too good for these people because they're sinners or whatever, when Jesus had dinner with the collectors and with the sinners and the prostitutes. But I think also there's a difference between Christians. Jesus was very merciful and wanted to bring pagans to repentance and, change their minds and bring them to the truth. But he was not kind to the
Hypocrites.
to the hypocrites, to the arrogant religious people. Now, of course, those people were in a way, they were on his team. They were Jews, and then there are Christians who are supposedly on our team, but within that there are wolves that we should absolutely distance ourselves from. We should kick those people out. But at the same time, we should be kind and welcoming to, without welcoming any kind of the bad stuff itself. Like, we should not welcome the ideas, but we should welcome the people and try to call those people, just like Jesus did, to repentance.
That's fair. It's all fair. I don't know what my role is in all this. I know that I've been given an opportunity through whatever circumstances. I have a very vicious pen. Pen is mightier than the sword. I have a weapon in my hand that stabs with horrifying accuracy at weak points in the arguments and beliefs of people who I find are, you might call them cultists. You might call it like a type of, I wrote it down earlier today. There is a new religion out there that worships things like sex, for instance, and I could list all of the different types of things that they worship, but the way that sorry,
an actual religion.
It's not formal, but they, in the way that a human being will worship anything, like when you worship nothing, you can worship anything. That quote. They worship things like the present, and they sacrifice the future in the way that, let's say, early Old Testament, they would sacrifice the future so that they could have a better present, as opposed to sacrificing the present to get a better future. And so that's really, as far as I'm concerned, what the abortion debate's about. It's not about bodily autonomy. It's about, it is inconvenient to have a child right now. So instead of sowing seeds for the next generation and sacrificing myself, I'm going to sacrifice my offspring so that I can have a better harvest for myself, which is self-terminating. And not only does it destroy you now, it destroys your chances for a future lineage, let's say. The reason that there aren't so many people who are fighting the cultural battle, I suppose, is I always think about when I start a new project, the 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 count the cost problem of when there's this parable story, guy was going to build a tower or something like that, and basically he didn't have enough bricks, and then everyone made fun of him.
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and that was more in the context of what's the cost of becoming a disciple. Do you have enough bricks to build this tower, and what happens if you don't have enough? And I decided I don't have enough, so I didn't want to be dishonorable and say I'm going to start this major project, and then it turns out, no, I'm not really being called to do it anyway. The reason I bring that up is because I see around us there is a counter. I use the word religion, but I don't know. Their sacraments are things like the drag shows. They're initiating younger people, but if I don't want to say things that are crass on your podcast, but they do things in massive group settings that are essentially offerings to their god of pleasure and self-serving narcissism, and let's burn down the future because we're horrible people and we feel horrible, and for a few brief moments we don't feel horrible, and it's sort of a, what's the word, nihilistic pleasure god that it's forming anyway. So when you take an axe to their roots in the same way that they're taking axes to the Christian foundations of America, let's say, we can tell that they're doing it because you see what's happening to the next generation, in the way that, like, even something as simple as, I was told by a youngster way back in the day, I was arguing with them about some cultural issue, and they say, "You're not wrong, George, but it's the way that you're saying it that makes me reject what you're saying." And I said,
Oh, I
okay,
hear that a lot.
it's fair. So it doesn't feel good. I have to put more chocolate and candy on the outside of this medicine. You don't disagree with what I'm saying. So fast forward to years later, I'm drawing my stupid cartoons. And a cartoon is like a picture's worth 1,000 words kind of thing.
Yeah,
And times four. So I have, every time I drew a new cartoon, it's 4,000 words of text, let's say. And
yeah.
and the pill, it goes down smooth because it has pretty colors and all that stuff, and but I have a point to make, and sometimes the point is so vicious that, like, I received I have been receiving death threats the past few weeks, or I got a 7-day suspension that I'm still waiting to be lifted, and I know that I'm pressing on the target because they scream when I touch the nerve, the raw nerve.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing it because of some dark pleasure that I get from it. It's because they need to be stopped, or they need to at least be driven back into the caves from which they emerged, so that they can't corrupt the next generation. And hopefully more and more people will wake up and realize how dangerous these people are. I've been around them because I've been an artsy fartsy type for my whole life. I've been around artsy people my whole life. I like them. I agree with a lot of their beliefs and stuff, in the sense of, like, well, I could get into a whole thing, but I like them.
Art is a good thing.
It is, and artists can be good people, and maybe even they have good reasons for having their beliefs, even though the method and the outcome, they haven't thought about it far enough. But I've been around these people a long time, and I think their celebration of what we would call sin needs to be driven back into the shadows where it belongs, where if they want to indulge that stuff, I can't stop them, but I am certainly not going to celebrate your normalization of things that I think are destructive to the future of humanity, and I'm not going to allow you to do it. If you want to try to stop me, you could try, but so far I've been given enough grace to come back and keep pushing on that nerve, And who knows what's going to happen in the next few years. I know that a red wave is coming, but I don't know if that red wave is going to ultimately solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully one is coming, and hopefully at least is one step in the right direction of solving the problem.
I don't know, because I don't know how old you are, but when I was in my teens and 20s, the Republicans were in control, and I was not satisfied with their performance.
Yeah.
And they did things that I did not agree with. So I would say I'm politically homeless, even though I lean right, center right, let's say. But
Yeah.
because of my artsy background, can I can lean over the fence and say hi to my left friends in a friendly way, even though I don't live the way you guys live.
Cuss you out as you're leaning over.
Yeah, I'm centerish. I like to be malleable. I like to gain their strengths on both sides and weaknesses on both sides. I think I'm happy in the middle.
Yeah, there's that meme where uh, there's the person standing with the left,
Yeah.
and then the leftward, they shove them over the line, and they back way far away, and they start yelling at them like, "Why are you on the right?" or whatever.
You put
Um,
me here.
yeah, you put me here. My journey, I grew up, just being influenced by culture and stuff, and I kind of naturally wanted to fight against the conservatism of my family and kind of the place I grew up in. Like I grew up in the hills of West Virginia where everybody flew a Confederate flag and whatever. And I was I was influenced, just by culture, and then moving to the city in Kansas City here where I am, of wanting to fight against that stuff. But then I started thinking about these things, then I started realizing, like, well, maybe there were some things wrong with that, but also the conservative values, those are true. Those are the best ones. And I actually think that our journey through faith, the thing you described, and my personal journey is really similar, where I kind of grew up uh, Protestant, youth group, really involved in church, all exactly the same stuff. Kind of started doubting, and then came back to it in college, and then I eventually, read Apologetics and C.S. Lewis, basically the same story, beat by beat. And I I just I was like, this is true, and then if it is true, I'm going to follow it. And I didn't do it perfectly over the years, and I think I'm becoming hopefully more faithful in this as the years go on. But if this is true, and if this is meaningful, and if God really does exist, and if Jesus really did raise from the dead, and these values are good things and things worth fighting for, then that is the thing that I will give my life to, which is why I am not afraid to say things that need to be said. And then you aren't either. You say these things, like you said, you hit just the right buttons. Even if people say, well, you don't, I agree with what you said, but I don't like the way you said it. That could be a sign that you're actually saying exactly the right thing. Because it, I hear that a lot on my side from Christians, where like, oh, I don't like your tone. But it seems like in a lot of situations, people use tone as an excuse to like throw away a good argument, when we should actually be having conversations about the arguments and the concepts themselves, which I think is what you're doing such a good job at, regardless of the hate and the death threats and the Twitter bans. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you also is like, why, what motivation do you have to get kicked off of Twitter and to get all these death threats?
Motivation, I certainly don't like it, but I
Yeah.
was thinking about, I I guess it really sank in over the years when I hear about stories of early Christians and what they had to go through. And even though I'm not openly practicing, like, I'll talk to myself as if I'm praying. So I assume someone's listening. And sometimes he answers those prayers. And what's funny is when he answers them, you'll get this. I wouldn't tell this to some non Christian, I guess, because they wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
When my prayers are answered, it's never what I get what I asked for, and then I said, wow, that really is not what I wanted. I I'm surprised by I don't want to say examples because it'll sound bad, but like I got what I wanted and it's not what I thought it was going to be, and now I'm stuck. And that sounds horrible actually if you plug it into certain things, but I'm being vague on purpose. But I
It's
got what
okay.
I wanted, and let's say I wanted a certain job, drawing
Mhm.
comics, and I asked for this job for many years and I finally got it. And now I'm like, "Oh, this is a job. I don't want a job. I wanted to draw comics for my own pleasure." And it's like, "Oh, I'm serving customers? What a drag. I have a job now." It's something like that. But anyway,
Yeah,
we were talking about Christians and motivations. Or
yeah.
the early Christians, way back in, like, say, 1030 AD to the when it was officially the religion of Rome or something. Those people were fed to lions and stuff, and you get the Jesus fish where I draw the half circle and you draw the half circle, and it was very underground, and you would get killed if you were discovered as a Christian. And I have for many years thought about those types of Christians, and then I look around at our modern day society that we were born into, and I say, wow, these people, if they were really persecuted, if they really were tested, most of them would give up their faith in a second. And I've always been the type to be like, well, I don't want to attach myself to people like that, because if I'm going to give my life for something, I really want my roots to go deep.
Yeah.
So I gravitated towards people who I thought were like that, admiring that. And then I guess over the years, it's just become part of my, when I hear about the men I want to emulate, the guys who stuck to their guns, who really paid a big price for sticking to their guns. I admire them, and that instinct tells me that even though I don't like getting death threats and God knows what else worse things are going to happen to me over the years, I don't even want to think about it. I'm going to have to stick to those guns if I am to respect myself, not because I want to be shot in the street, God forbid, or attacked by some freak in a mask, but because something is telling me this is what needs to be done. And maybe there aren't a lot of people who can do what I'm doing, and maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing, even though when I asked for this, I did not imagine this is what was going to happen. I just wanted to have a fun job drawing comics. But maybe this is also in some ways exactly what I asked for and more when I was in my 20s. It's more challenging than I thought it was ever going to be. But isn't that right in line with what the biblical stories say? You ask for something, and boy, do you get what you want, and then some. So I don't. It's come with a lot of baggage that I didn't expect, but I also see a path up this mountain where I don't know if I'm the guy for this, but maybe.
We never are.
Right. Like I wanted to be like Charles Schultz as a younger man. Simple, drawing fun little cute comics and wholesome, and I could have lots of money, and that was great. But it's not like he was happy with all that money anyway. But when I wanted to be like that, instead of being the next Charles Schultz, I guess I'm the first George. And maybe that's okay. So even though this path that I'm whatever, however I got here, it's scary and I don't know where it ends. But I like to try to think that there's a design in all of it. So
Maybe you're right.
yeah. So again, the door's open. I'm not saying none of this is not by design. It's fun to think that, and maybe at the end I'll find out. But I'm continuing not because I want to necessarily, but because I feel like there is a design somehow in this, and it is not my place to say I don't want this anymore because I asked for it. And
Mhm.
even if I were to quit now, I'm sort of unemployable. So
Yeah.
I I don't
Might as well
know. Yeah, I
your
don't
gift.
know. It's either I go down in a blaze of glory and get canceled again, or I work at as a, I don't know, was going to work at like retail or something. I'm sure it wouldn't be that bad, but at our age, you don't want to start a new career if you don't have to.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, well, you have blazed a trail, and hopefully you're able to stay on it. And you've been given these gifts, and you've been given this voice, and you're using them. And it would be unfaithful of you to your own gifts to not to. And one of the morals of the story that I pick up is that maybe you ought to pray a little more, because maybe those prayers will be answered.
Probably. I mean, between us, we speak the language of. All right, what am I trying to say? I think too much and I don't say it out loud. Let's say one could say I pray all the time, but I should say it out loud perhaps more. I like to go up on the mountain and reflect, or go for my long drives, and then I'll say these words out loud instead of thinking them. And then, but again, it's a joke between me and nobody of like when I ask for something and it gets answered. There was a good preacher I once heard. When you ask for something, God has two answers. It's either yes or I have something better in mind. Something like that. So,
and sometimes that better thing isn't what we want, and it might
No.
actually be bad for us sometimes.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
like,
everybody brings out of the.
well, there's those funny testimonies of people saying I was dragged kicking and screaming into grace or something like that.
Yeah.
It's funny, but I don't know where this ends. That's the funny thing, and it's in my personality to just kind of let things. There's the architect and there's the gardener type of person, and I'm more of a gardener, I guess, sometimes. Where I don't know where this is going, I don't want to know, because maybe I would stop if I knew where it was going.
It might get hard.
Hmm?
It might get hard.
Yeah, and I'm lazy. I'm Greek. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. So when I'm thrown into a difficult situation, my instinct is to say, no, I'd rather just sit on the porch and drink coffee and do nothing and not be challenged. Whereas, let's say this next month, I have my little calendar in front of me. There's one new thing every week that I don't want to do. But I have to do it. And if I don't do those things, the whole rest of the year will not take place. And what happens next is so out of my control that I'm terrified of what's going to happen. I'm a shy person, for example. If I go on big shows or whatever and show my face, and that means people can make fun of the way I look, or pick out the things that I've said and rip me apart psychologically. Like, there's a inside joke of I don't want to say things that are not nice on your podcast, but like I have a joke about grabbing people in inappropriate ways. Yeah. So there was this whole thing that they seem to have glommed onto. Like I make. Yeah. So they're like he's drawing out his fantasies in public.
And that's not what it's about.
I'm making fun of them, but the thing is, so they're saying they're spreading things about me that are, it sucks that people think that about me, and I'm sure worse will happen over the years. Like they'll look at some piece of art that I drew and be like, oh, this is where he revealed his desire to do X, Y, and Z. And that'll suck. But hopefully by then I will have been given the tools to withstand psychological trauma like that. Like getting canceled for a week on Twitter a year ago, 4 years ago, might have really pissed me off and ruined my mood. But now it's just kind of like the cool kid who gets detention. I'm like, yeah, smoking in the back. Yeah, I've been canceled again. It's not a big deal.
Not many people can say that they were the most popular comic on Reddit and they got canceled for it.
And
oh, go ahead.
On one hand, my lesser self wants to be proud of that, but on the other hand, I say, I'm just a plumber who fixes toilets, and my hands get real poopy sometimes. But somebody's got to do this stupid job. And if it happens that my stuff is higher profile, sometimes fine. But I still want to be the guy who is. Lewis says humility is not thinking less of yourself; it's thinking of yourself less. I think,
Mhm.
and I want to take that to heart. So even if I might have a high watermark in career wise every so often, that just means that's a sign telling me to keep doing what I'm doing, not to be proud of it, but just to, hey, you're on the right track, keep going. So I try not to think a bit about it too much. I try not to think about myself too much. Um, Already, I think too much about myself anyway. But yeah, it's a weird feeling. I'm terrified of where my career is going because I'm a very uh, small, petty person with many personality tics, and it would be very easy to dismantle me psychologically, and perhaps that day is coming. But
Like the song, because we're all just infallible, broken little human beings. One of the weird things that I believe is, that I think is totally true is that we all live in reality, and everybody really recognizes that. Everybody recognizes obvious truths like the sky is blue and that men are men and women are women, and there's no changing these things.
what?
But yeah, what? But some people can, they can blatantly lie just because they care about their own desires more than they care about the truth, obviously, or they can be deceived. And so I think when people like look at your artwork and see a comic, they know what it's about, but they can lie about it and say you want to, you're like an assaulter or whatever, and they know that that's not true. But then other people, they can be deceived, but there's no reason to be afraid of lies and deception because the truth is always more powerful than that. And we live in reality, and everybody realizes that, even the enemies.
Yeah. There's a good quote from Clarence Thomas recently. He was saying that regardless of whether you're in a storm or not, north is still north. That's a good way to put it. So they can lie as much as they want. And you're right. If I know the truth and if God knows the truth, then really that we've been trained to make that enough for us. I'm sure Paul being locked up on whatever island he was on for whatever reason, he didn't know why he was locked up there or what it would mean for the rest of the world, but he was put there for a reason. And he wrote half the New Testament there, let's say. So I don't know why I'm being. I'm not even like a martyr or something, okay? I've been canceled on Twitter. It's not like I'm being fed to lions in the gladiator pits or something. But I
Yeah.
was also thinking about this on the way to talk to you. The COVID stuff and the vaccines and the masks was like this little test of, in school we were taught like about the Holocaust and stuff, and everyone wants to believe I would have been the type of person to let people stay in my attic and I'm going to save them and I'm not going to rat anybody out. And then I was like, okay. But then the mask mandates happened and people started losing their jobs. And then you were afraid to say anything in public because you might lose your Twitter account with 5 followers. And so, really, how many people really have the strength of character? Um,
Yeah.
and then, and again, I'm not acting like this was any serious thing, but like, what if now really we were called on to really, our lives are on the line, our families are on the line? What percentage of people would really have the guts to stand up and tell the truth? Maybe 5%, maybe less.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nonetheless, we have to tell the truth. I could lose everything tomorrow, but we've been trained to do that. So maybe my reward is in the next life. I would love to believe that, but I have to act as if that's what's going to happen, or bad men will succeed, and I don't want that.
Yeah, you made the observation that people, if they were confronted with just the slightest amount of persecution nowadays, would crumble. And
They said you're not allowed to go to church on Sundays,
yeah,
stuff like that.
well, which incidentally they have, and we have seen that. over the past couple of years with the masks and the vaccines, and like God doesn't, just speaking for Christians, God doesn't give the government authority to do all of the things that they do. And so to me, any Christian, any church, just following blindly the orders of the government because the government is not God, they are worshiping the government instead of God. They have crumbled because they have been persecuted. Churches have closed, churches have required masks or kicked people out from worshiping with the body of Christ. And we like it's been proven, much less if people were threatened to be burnt on stakes or go to jail. And we've seen, very few, but many brave pastors up in Canada actually go to jail for keeping their churches open
Yeah.
during all this stuff. But yeah, the truth is that it's not that it's coming, but that it's happened and the churches have caved. There was a theologian back in Germany called Bonhoeffer who he was a part of an assassination attempt on Hitler, and
Yeah.
he failed, unfortunately, and then was killed for it. Bonhoeffer, he was a martyr, but he noticed very similar things with the German church that we are noticing in the church in America, where a lot of people are just automatically taking the side of the government. And they're saying, well, that's the loving thing to do, and we want unity, and they're disguising it in all this like pseudo biblical garbage language, even
Compassion.
though right, compassion, even though it's not true compassion to lie to people. It's not true compassion to, you know, disobey the command of God. But that's, they hide it there, and then the weak among us, who are the less the people who don't have our eyes open, we don't see that, and then we fall into these traps. But yeah, persecution, even in the most slightest degree, has happened, and we have crumbled as a society, or else the lockdowns and all the mess over the past 2 years wouldn't have even happened if we were stronger. Which is a note to conservatives that we need to man up, and we need more strong men and women and families to be willing to say truth, unafraid of the consequences, because we're on the good guys team.
That always used to get on my nerves, actually. If a Christian really believes the crazy, insane notion that you could come back to life after you die, like they don't act like that's a big enough deal. Sometimes I feel like you actually think you'll come back to life when you're dead, right? Why aren't you living in such a way that tells you you're going to be resurrected? Like, that's a crazy thing to believe. I want to believe it. I don't have the faith to believe it sometimes, most of the time. But if you were living in such a way as if you believed that, I don't think you would necessarily be afraid of going to church and catching a bad cold or a flu. Maybe the older people in the church, out of respect, you would tell them, hey, maybe we can have you tune in on Zoom or something, because I don't want you to get sick. But those of us who are young and able to withstand, it's been proven by this point. I don't like this idea of, all right, maybe this is a separating wheat from the chaff kind of situation where we now know there are less Christians around, actual Christians, practicing Christians, and the ones who are weak, maybe they needed to be exposed.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'm saying this from a very far distance, watching with a telescope. Hang on. There are way fewer of us than I thought there were. But it's better. It's that stupid saying. It's better to go to war with 10 lions than 100 sheep or something. To quote
Yeah.
to quote the great novel Rambo 3. Whatever. So we know how many units are really on the field now. That doesn't change my strategy much, but maybe there is no parachute. Maybe we need to jump anyway. And maybe the only comfort, if there is to be any comfort at all, is that someone's watching it happen and it will all turn out okay at the end. And maybe that's the true cost of being a disciple. And that's why there's so few of them. Because especially like if a guy has a family and stuff, and they paid their mortgage and they've got, a whole life built up, and the more you've invested in the world, your life, the harder it is to be called to risk it all. And I'm not in a position where I could tell other men how much they should put on the table. But if I recall, the disciples were asked to put everything on the table. And that's a big thing to be asked. And once during a Bible study, I remember asking, is there a difference between being saved and being a disciple? Because it used to bother me a lot. Like, is it just enough to be a believer? Or are you eventually going to be asked to go into the wilderness and sacrifice everything? And that's where you could tell the people apart from their words. Are they just words or are they actions as well? That's how you could tell who really believes what they believe.
Yeah.
So I think about that all the time. And I'm a coward by nature. Uh, I don't know about you. I would love to talk to you about this offline, actually. But I don't know where culture's going. I'm not super optimistic as far
Mm,
as I think it will turn out okay, but people are going to be asked to sacrifice more than they're willing to give up. Um,
yeah.
so I'm scared of that, but other Christians have been asked to sacrifice more. I'll stop talking. Go on. I'm sorry. We can talk about this later.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jesus, so I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. Jesus says, enter by the narrow gate,
Yeah.
for the gate is wide that leads to destruction. And that's exactly kind of what we're seeing, at least in our time. I, by contrast, am incredibly optimistic about the future, but that's kind of a rare position. Hopefully, it becomes more common in theology.
I
But
would like to be infected by that, please.
yeah, well, I'll do my best. Yeah. But yeah, it uh, you I think a distinction that I've kind of been made aware of the past couple of years. I've always just said, like, you're a Christian or you're not a Christian or whatever. And this can apply to many things, I think. But I think the distinction that we can make is between the the visible church and then the invisible church. They're like God chose the Jewish people to like carry forth his promises, and then that kind of turned into Christians as the fulfillment of that. And many of the Jews were not saved, but they were all his chosen people. And I think in the same way, there can be people who call themselves Christians who are not saved. There are people who they can go to church on Sundays, and this is obvious when you think about it. Like, not everybody in church is saved. So there are people who appear as Christians, they do all the right stuff, whatever, but they maybe they don't bear those fruits. They don't actually have the Holy Spirit. They are not saved by God, even though they are a part of the right tree.
Makes
and
sense.
and we have seen in history, like, many of these branches being cut off. Many churches, even small churches and even big like denominations, they have branched off into crazy territory, and so God has cut them off from the visible church. Even though people, perhaps even to this day, like I disagree with Catholicism, for example, but I think there are many people who call themselves Catholics who are saved, even though I think Catholicism as a whole is unfaithful. But I think that's just an interesting distinction that we can um, think about within Christianity, which also probably applies to many other things. You can call yourself a conservative, but if you don't have conservative values, then you're a fake conservative.
Well, again, I'm quoting Lewis a lot. There are many ways to fall down, and there's only one way to stand up. He said that, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then you think of, say, the way that the Bible says that God operates is there's a ton of branches, but there's one line. Adam, Abraham, David, Jesus. One line all the way down. You can trace it all. But there are many directions that things branched out. So if we are to live out the assertions of the Bible, we are being shown that there are a million and one ways that humanity can fail, and God finds a way to make something excellent come from all that failure to teach us a lesson, perhaps.
Mm.
Um, So I'm not disheartened by seeing so many failures around me as I used to be when I was younger, because I was idealistic and naive, whatever I want to call myself. Um, the the complete collapse around me, church wise and society wise, just tells me it's even more important than for a miracle to come out of a clear blue sky, like lightning out of a clear blue sky. Again, I'm quoting Lewis again. He's like
Mhm.
possessed me or something. Uh, he's on my shoulder. He's behind this thing.
That's
Uh,
good.
yeah. So anyway, a miracle can come only when it's like there's no other possibility. You can't call it anything but a miracle, because humans are stubborn and stupid, and we are more likely to believe something was a coincidence than a miracle, even our very existence. So maybe things have to get so bad, and then we realize, oh wow, it was only because of a miracle that we made it through this. And even then, our faith is still hanging on by a thread.
Yeah.
So that's a nice thing to believe. Maybe I'll choose to believe that over the next few years, as I'm sure horrors beyond our imagining are awaiting us. And the only way I can stay sane is by trying to have a sense of humor and remembering that this is all some sort of a plan, maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, God gets the most glory for things if he works through people who couldn't have done things on their own. He chooses the weak and
People
the
with
imperfect.
stutters.
Yeah, people with stuff. Right, exactly. And no single person who God ever works through believes that they're worthy, that they're faithful.
Yeah. So that's I'm glad to have at least talked to you. That's why for the people listening, I'm sure they understand. Like when when I recognize the kind of talk with the kind of people that we're talking about, when I hear you talk, I'm like, oh, that guy. He's saying things that I don't know. It's just you see a light bulb in the middle of a dark forest, and you go, oh, I'm going to go over there now. So I'm glad we finally connected. Um,
What enough? Me too.
well,
Yeah, to
yeah,
go ahead.
that's all.
To end on a light note, I just wanted to very quickly ask you, for people who want to educate themselves in the things that George is educated in, like art or storytelling. What are some books or people that they can follow to get familiar with that, or even just things that, like artists that they can follow or model, or things that you like that have inspired you?
Um, I wouldn't name anyone specific, but I would say I have a nice style that I try to follow. Like when I go to a museum, uh, I say find whatever piece speaks to you. So
Hmm.
if I go with a normie person that doesn't like follow art or anything, and that's fine. I don't mean normie pejoratively, but maybe there's a piece somewhere in this museum that will just, for some reason, it's speaking to you right now, and stand in front of it and just drink it. Let it wash over you, and maybe it's nothing. Maybe the lesson it's trying to teach you is not going to manifest for many years, but expose yourself to art that you can't explain why, but it's like a whisper. For me, like years ago, it was the Impressionists, and I never knew what it was about them. But many years later, now, let's say I was studying them in my early 20s, 15 years later, almost, I'm now drawing and painting in their style, but digitally. And I never realized that it wasn't intentional, but cartooning is very fast, and the Impressionists were very fast. So you look at the way Van Gogh and Monet, Renoir, all those guys used to paint so fast because the light would change, and for them color selection was more important than rendering and clarity. Um, but anyway, I studied them because they gave me pleasure to look at their stuff. So if an artist, an up and coming artist, is interested in learning, I would say find art that excites you and makes you feel something, and just submerge yourself in it. Try to copy it, try to figure out why it speaks to you, and maybe you'll oscillate between different styles, and that's fine. But you have to practice all the time. I believe in something called the 10,000 hour rule. Essentially, it means if you do anything for 10,000 hours, you'll master it. So don't expect to be a professional immediately, but you have to submerge yourself in it for 10,000 hours. And those hours may as well be like the ecstasy of creation and communing with the art. And those 10,000 hours will go by faster if you really enjoy it. So rather than name any specific artist, I would say you have to go and find who speaks to you. And over time, you'll figure out why. And you'll just realize one day, hey, I'm getting pretty good at this. And yeah.
That's good. So George is on Instagram and Twitter at gprime85, right?
Yeah.
And Patreon at Studio NJ. And I think it would be awesome if George could make this a full-time thing. So if you want to throw a few dollars his way every month, then that would be awesome, because it would allow him to make more awesome content and make more leftists upset, which is great. We all want to see that. We could just sit back with popcorn. But also, I know you recently came out with a comic with Razor Fist. What other projects are you working on that people can follow, or what recent projects did you make that they can look up?
Well, I'm currently working on a children's book. I have not said the name out loud because I don't want anyone to steal it just yet. But I'm working on a book that I'm going to sell through my family's new new Etsy shop, in which my wife makes like children's clothing and cute little like bibs and stuff and little animals. She's an expert at like sewing, making plushies and stuff like that, dresses, clothes. Like, she's amazing at it. And for many years I've been saying, you should really take advantage of these talents instead of. So anyway, we're going to open a shop that's for families, and I'm going to publish my latest children's book, which is about like a cute little mouse adventure, whatever. I'll show it off later this month. So we're going to launch her shop along with all her cute things that she makes, because my stuff is rather adultish, kind of like really sarcastic and a lot of cursing and stuff. So that's my one shop on Etsy. But her shop and the family shop will be a sweet, family-oriented thing. So I'll publish my children's book there, and that'll be probably later this month. And I'll post like crazy over the next month as we announce the book. So actually, it's been a blessing in disguise to be suspended on Twitter, because I've been working only on the book for the past week or so. Yeah. So I'll be finishing it up soon. And it's been tested, and it has made women cry. So that means it's very sweet. Cry with like tears of like motherly,
Yeah.
So the goal is we want to talk about pissing off leftists, if I may, one more last thing.
Yes, please.
I've seen so many bad children's books from the left, and like really gross stuff, actually.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
what a perfect time. Yeah. So this is just a sweet little adventure about finding a berry to put on a cake. And the little character gets in all kinds of silly adventures, darn it. And he learns an important lesson at the end. And so that's what the book's about. And it's just going to be this cute thing that parents should read to their kids, I hope, during bedtime. And if this works out, I'd love to keep doing it. Which is ironic, because if I'm the boob grabber on Reddit, he made this sweet children's book too.
Yeah.
So who knows what'll happen in my career, but that'll be funny.
So and they know, like, people who really they care. They know that you're wholesome and that you have good values,
good intentions.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I can vouch for that.
All right. Good enough.
Well, thanks for coming on, George. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for sticking it out to the end. I really appreciate you listening. If you want to be a big help, give me a like and a comment. Even if you disagree with me, I will respond and we can talk about it. If you also want to be notified of more content that I put out in the future, give me a subscribe. That helps tremendously be able to share truth with more people.